I have to walk now, but before I went by car. And there was a group of us, and we got there, got to the crossing, and after being really critical of Israel, and I'm deeply suspicious, they said, you can go in, you can go in, you can go in, you can go in. Because to go to West Bank, you have to go through Israel. You know, you have to go through Israel to get into Ramallah. And it came to me and they said, I've got traces of explosives on me. So I couldn't come in. They didn't ask me where I'd been, had I been handling explosives, they just said, you can't come in. So I was stuck. I had to walk back. And I walked back to the Palestinian guards, and they couldn't speak English, and I was completely lost. And they sort of beckoned for me to sit down, which I did. And then this taxi arrived, and they said to get in, and they sort of pushed me in the taxi, and the taxi took me to the nearest town, Betanoon, which has suffered terribly, by the way. And we drove down this little alleyway, and I thought, oh my goodness, I might be being kidnapped. And then I joked with myself that I hope they keep me long enough to clear my debts. And then I thought, no, my wife will spend all my money. But it wasn't. They took me. Britain's probably best export is the World Service. People in Palestine and people in many parts of the world listen to the BBC World Service. And Al Jazeera is another very good channel for truth and honesty. But they took me to the only man in Betanoon who could speak English. So he said, welcome, and he looked after me, and they were wonderful hosts, he and his family. And I tried to give them some money. I had lots of dollars on me. They wouldn't accept any money. The taxi driver who took me refused money. He came and picked me up and took me back to Erez. He refused money. But this is typical, absolutely typical of Palestine. And you know, here am I, a rich Westerner, and they're very, very poor people, and they refuse money. I've stopped asking for directions in Palestine, because people who haven't got a car, and they can't really explain to you where to go, jump in the car with you, take you miles to where you want to go, and then they get out and walk home. You know, I don't ask directions. Mind you, I'm a typical man, you know, I think I can find my way. But this is typical, that hospitality and the kindness that you receive day in, day out from people is just wonderful. Now, while I was there, and since I've been there, Israel have built this huge wall around, this is the West Bank, this is the Jerusalem side of the West Bank. Now, at the end of this road is the crossing, and then we're into Ramallah, not far away. This side is Al-Quds, is East Jerusalem, is the capital of Palestine, where some 250,000, 300,000 Palestinians live. But if you live in East Jerusalem, which has been occupied by the Israelis, and you marry somebody from the West Bank, from Ramallah, they cannot come and live with you. They're not allowed to come into your capital city to live. If you marry somebody from Ramallah, you have to go and live in Ramallah. Then you lose your residency. You lose your right to live in your home city. You know, it's a policy of trying to depopulate. And of course, the Israelis are building all over East Jerusalem at the moment. Not all over, but they started to build in East Jerusalem. They've built in the West Bank, they've built settlements. Now, what we think of settlements and what settlements are very different. The settlements in the West Bank are like beautiful towns. They've occupied the best positions, usually on the hills. They take most of the resources, and there's probably 500,000 Israelis living in the West Bank, which, you know, which many of us think it's completely run by Palestinians. It's not. And previously, I think it's eased now. To connect all these settlements, they built beautiful roads to all the settlements. But Palestinians were not allowed on the roads. So it's occupied, in a sense. We can talk about this, but I think the worst thing that Palestine has ever done was form its own government. If they're occupied, they're occupied. Let's stay as occupied peoples you know, and we're one country, and if they're a democracy, let's be occupied all together and then give us a vote, and there's more of us than them. But they've created these situations where now, you know, the Palestinians in the West Bank are all walled in there, and the Palestinians in Gaza are all locked in there, and the Israelis are carrying on. I mean, I often try and see it from an Israeli side. Okay, you know, a group of school children at a disco get blown up. I mean, that's awful, that's tragic, you know, but then 1,400 people in the recent war on Gaza get killed, 500 children. You know, they don't, surely they realise that some of those people who've lost their family members or their brothers or their sisters are going to try and get them back. You know, it's their only form of resistance. It's this state of Israel, which is armed by America and funded by America, and apart from Egypt, the only people who can sort this out are Americans. You know, are massively, in terms of weapons, superior, and they kill huge numbers of civilians. You know, what do they expect? Are people not going to go and try and damage them? But there's been very little of that recently, and Hamas actually say they are not firing the rockets, and they are not sending suicide bombers, and I believe them. I believe them. This is the Palestinian side of the wall, and that's somebody who you'll all recognise, I think, Yasser Arafat. But all this traffic is enormous because really the only occupation is in East Jerusalem or Jerusalem, and the checkpoints are just, you know, just constant. Even when you're inside, there's constant checkpoints, constant checkpoints, constant checkpoints. I want to just very briefly, there's only a few more slides I want to show you. Does anybody know where this is? No? It's Beirut, right? This is Beirut. There's about 400,000 Palestinians from the north of what is now Israel fled to Lebanon, right? And Beirut is a very rich city. It gets, you know, heavily attacked by Israel from time to time. So here is Beirut, right? And a lot of people do live in very poor environments. And this is Shatila refugee camp for Palestinian people. It is shameful. I got soaked walking through these streets because all the pipes are leaking. And the Lebanese will not, they have something like, I don't know, 60, 70, 300 jobs that they will not let Palestinians work in. So there's doctors here who can't work, other than for themselves, for the Palestinians. So the poor Palestinians, in a sense, I mean, they're much better off in Jordan. In Jordan, Palestinians are citizens of Jordan. They have the rights of Jordanian citizens. In Syria, the same. But in Lebanon, the Lebanese government, because it's so, you know, sensitive about numbers between Christians and Muslims, they will not give Palestinian citizenship. And this is how Palestinians live. And I walk around these streets. This is a wide street, by the way. This is a wide street. Most are incredibly narrow, and they're built up, and they haven't built properly, so the housing is joined at the top. But everybody is just sitting around doing nothing. Young men, young women, old men, old women, sitting around doing nothing. I think I picked up in that Shatila camp. This is where large numbers of Palestinians were killed. Do you remember that? When the Israeli army allowed these Christian militias in to kill, and they killed everybody they could get hold of. But there's a lot of anger in these camps. I think one wrong move from a Lebanese army